So, you've decided to implement new ERP software. While development of the new tech begins, how will you prioritize day-to-day operations? Keep listening to find out how to strike the right balance and make the best use of the resources available. Welcome back. This is RPI Tech Connect, and I'm your host, Chris Airy. In this segment, we're diving into a common scenario when kicking off an implementation. Picture this. Your teams are geared up to tackle the heavy lift of developing the future state ERP. Whether it's an application or a full suite, preparing the new system can be intense. Meanwhile, day-to-day operations start to slip, and your teams naturally shift priorities to keep the lights on. This knee-jerk reaction often results in a stalled project. This situation happens all too often, but can be completely avoided with the right project management team. And finding the balance between operations and system development is key. And to help us walk that fine line, we've got Senior Project Manager, Mr. Spencer Lefevre. Spencer, what's up, man? Welcome to the program.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris, for having me on. This topic's certainly an important one, and I've seen it often. I've been a part of the team going through this as well on my own projects. It's certainly challenging managing the day-to-day operations with also what you need to accomplish for future projects.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and I can't wait to dive into that a little bit more. But I think, before we get into the nitty-gritty details here, I'm curious to hear about your background, because I think the additional context of knowing how you came to be in this position is going to help in understanding the different priorities between, balancing system development and current operations. So can you share a little bit about, your professional career and how you got to be where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I started out early on in my IT career handling server installs and running cables. Those were the early days, and taking it all the way back. And then slowly started working with a lot of software development and technical development, and then making the full-on shift into project management. I've now been working with projects for about 6 or 7 years, and have mainly focused on software implementation projects. And I think really my background in tech gives me that ability to understand the complexities of each environment.
I feel like that's not a very common career path too, right? To move from tech into project management. Is that?
It can be, but it certainly is a different one to a different path to take.
Yeah, and I imagine you've acquired some super useful skill sets there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's great to know your foundation there, and so let's shift gears here and take a closer look at the scope of a new system implementation. What does that look like? How involved is it? For those who are maybe gearing up for one, what can they expect? What does that look like? Yeah.
Well, any new system or software that you're going to implement is certainly going to be a significant effort. It's going to take multiple teams, multiple months. It's going to span anywhere from 18 to 24 months, and sometimes even longer. And you've got to factor in the complexity aspect of this, because with software, there's extensive customization required or development approaches that need to be taken for the organization.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any examples that come to mind that kind of make, determine the length and the complexity that you can speak to?
Well, I think for a lot of reasons, payroll comes up commonly. We see that a lot with payroll implementations. If there's one thing everyone knows, you don't want a bunch of errors with employees' pay or anyone's pay. So you want to make sure those pay cycles line up, and that you can do several payroll parallels with testing. And even with finance, you see that a lot as well. With finance, you've got to make sure that you have a hands-on approach when it comes to fiscal year end, and work those into the time frame as well, so that they can close out the year.
Yeah, the payroll one especially, it feels like the kind of thing that once you do cutover, there is no room for error. No mistakes, 100% accuracy, yeah?
Absolutely. You want to make sure everything is buttoned up, and if you catch any errors, you catch them early on in testing.
Okay, that all sounds pretty intense, and something that is probably difficult for maybe an organization to navigate on its own. Would you agree? Like these implementation projects?
I think so. I think it's a balance sometimes of trying to figure out the right plan and the right path and the right approach for that.
Okay, yeah. So, what kind of risks do you think are involved in an ERP install without if you don't have the right project management resources? What kind of things can go wrong?
Well, I think for one aspect of this is your project management team can kind of come in there and not fully have an understanding of the background of the technical team or the finance team or supply chain, et cetera. And having that third party PM kind of come in there and set some groundwork, set some neutral lines, and set the framework of establishing clear boundaries and what does the day-to-day look like really helps kind of shape the way the project needs to flow.
So all that kind of happens in the beginning, would you say, before you
For
kick off,
sure.
or yeah?
Yeah, well, I would say actually, once you are kicked off, you're going to meet with all the different teams. You're going to have a really maybe several meetings with each of those teams and understand what is their current day-to-day workload, what is something that they're really good at. Sometimes the development team may be really good at SQL. Other times they may be, not as proficient in Excel. So really leveraging those strengths, kind of taking note of those, but then also having those meetings to establish what is their current bandwidth, what is the room for opportunities where the consultant team can actually step in and assist.
Got it. So you're kind of documenting the strengths of certain team members, and so that like in the future or down the road, like you can call upon those resources if there's a need. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so when you're establishing this foundation for the project, I feel like you typically kind of create key milestones along the way to measure progress. Is that accurate?
Yeah, for most projects, you have usually a set standard of milestones that are going to be delivered. However, usually we see the big one after the first initial build and the first data conversion process. However, that's not to say or take lightly the smaller or many smaller project milestones that are going to be taking up place ahead of time.
Yeah. And so like, is that like documented somewhere or like celebrated on calls? Like how are those like checked off?
Well, it can be multiple different ways, but for the big milestones, it's usually a formal acceptance, whether that be through an email or a document repository. But then other times for the smaller ones, it's a quick win or a quick celebration on a call or something highlighted in the weekly project management notes.
Got it. And is this third party PM kind of the role that's responsible for overseeing milestone progress and how things are pacing with the project?
I think it depends. Most times that is the case. However, there's certainly times where the client, project manager, and the project management team on the consultant side works together to identify whether that milestone's been effectively hit and whether there's room for improvement or adjustments that need to be made.
Okay. So I appreciate you kind of, explaining how these projects evolve and what they typically look like. I'm wondering now if you can maybe talk about how to manage these, the day-to-day operations in tandem with system development and kind of the role that the PM does in balancing those two things.
Sure thing. Oftentimes it makes sense for clients to take on some of the development approaches when it comes to initially they want to take on that development aspect. They're excited about the project. Yeah. They're excited about the implementation. They want to get their hands in. But where that happens is then operationally things start to slip or adjust or have to take a back seat. So sometimes, we've found that, or I've personally found that bringing in the consultant team to leverage some of that development aspect but still allowing maybe if the team is 4, you allow 2 of them to kind of work on development, where 2 of them can then work on operational stuff, and then you kind of swap in between.
Do you think there's ever a time? I feel like it. You mentioned something there about the client getting excited about this new install, and like, oh, I can't wait to see it. I want to be a part of it. They're going to be the ones using it at the end of the day, so there's probably some interest there. I'm wondering, you said, there's a team of 4, 2 of them are doing day-to-day and 2 of them are doing development. Do you ever see the kind of thing where, like, for 6 weeks, 2 people are doing one thing and 2 people are doing another, and they switch to, like, get them all? Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that's really good because it allows the both sets of the team to still keep learning and still keep refining what they need to know for the project and implementation or the new software piece, but it allows them to still focus on the day-to-day operations.
Okay. And so in terms of, the third-party PM and, the partner who's assisting in this install, do you ever think that maybe one is better geared to do operations and the other is better for system development? Is there a right way to approach it?
I think every client is different. However, the right way or the most common way we see is where the client initially takes on small, quick wins for development, and then the client or the consultant team then takes on the large, bulkier items for development. And then during that process of evolution and development aspects, then we bring in the client team to engage them in learning what we developed and how we achieved the result.
So it sounds like then there's this focus on understanding the client needs and kind
Absolutely.
of like just, I guess, allocating resources from that perspective, like to know what they need and to know what they want, and then to kind of fill the gaps as they present themselves? Or
Yeah, you definitely need to understand the client's needs and the client bandwidth and the resourcing. If there's going to be a certain month that is going to be particularly heavy in operational focus, that's where you want the client team to actually do that piece, because as consultants, we don't do that every day. We do development, we do implementation, we do refinements or testing, but we're not going to know your operational aspects for your job in every capacity. So we can certainly give some guidance and frameworks, but ultimately we want the client's team to still be empowered to do their day-to-day job and keep the lights on.
yeah. Are there any stories you can share from, you've been doing this for quite some time. I'm curious to hear about maybe a unique situation where you came in as the PM and the project was headed in one direction and, things got changed up, or just anything you can share there. Yeah.
Well, I think on one of the examples that comes to my mind is when I was working with a recent client, and as the PM, I was handling a lot of the aspects, the day-to-day tasks, but when it came to software development and the technical build phase of the project, the team's really struggling to understand what was needing to be done within what time frame, and then trying to track that progress into motion. So what we did was I kind of stepped into that Scrum Master role and facilitated the development efforts and tracked the time and tracked the sprints and made sure development was moving in the right way.
So I got 2 questions for you there. First, the Scrum Master, it's a term I've heard dozens of times throughout my career, but could you explain what that is and how it differs from the PM?
Scrum Master is often used for agile development, and it's the Scrum Master leads the development sprints, and sprint isn't a running sprint, it's a sprint of development, usually a 2 to 4 week process where you assign workloads out to the different teams and track capacities and allocations that way. So the Scrum Master kind of leads those meetings, keeps everyone focused on a tight circle and a development cycle.
So when you made that transition in the middle of the project, was that like a surprise to people? Were they, oh, this guy can do that too? Or like, yeah, what was that like?
I think initially they were taken back by, okay, well, he knows his stuff with development as well. But that's really where, my background of being, my background in technology and technical development, as well as having the agile certifications on my end, really helps bring it all together, and then helped out. It actually helped out the development team to get back on track and kind of really focus in on the work that needed to be done.
I feel like your particular role there is like it really captures the value of having that third party PM. Like you truly were a resource gap fill. Like they needed something and you were able to like, pivot away from the traditional PM stuff and do Scrum Master, development stuff, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of times that's kind of one of those underrated aspects of a third-party project manager on the client or on the team side, is really making sure that they can look for opportunities and they can look for gaps that can be leveraged for some other resource or some other skill set that maybe that project manager has a good knack for smart sheets and worksheets and all those different aspects. And other times maybe they're like me and they have a really good solid background in technology.
It sounds like this is one of those things too. It gets back to what you mentioned earlier about like documenting the strengths and knowing where the resources lie in the event that you need them. Yeah, that includes yourself, I guess, huh?
Absolutely. You got to know where you got to hire the right resources and shift priorities depending on what your strengths are. You got to know internally and do a little bit of self-reflection as well.
Nice. Another question related to that. So when you made that transition, like how did that come up? Was it like on a call and you like recognized there was a need for the Scrum Master role and you were like, I can do that? Or how did that come to be?
It came up in multiple aspects within our internal project team calls and within leadership. It also was talked about as far as how to get the development team back on track and how to get them back in focus and move them in the right direction so that we could meet our targets.
Got it. So it was kind of one of those like almost proactive in that like, hey, we see that development is not going like, pacing the way it should be, and we think the addition of a Scrum Master role here will kind of get things back on track. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. One other question for you, and this is actually about something you mentioned earlier, and that was that like when you're understanding, like gathering the information and the needs of the client, to prioritize helping them balance operations and development. What kind of method do you deploy for soliciting that information? Is it like an interview? Is it just like a meeting? Is it a multitude of things?
Well, I think for multiple aspects, there's different ways to do it. However, the first approach that I normally take is just having a kind of a casual meeting to understand their current roles and what's going on, how the organization is handling X, Y, and Z. And then if needed, we can send out a questionnaire and some skill set analysis, or if we needed to do a skill set, assessment, anything like that. But really kind of taking that first stab of just having a really informal conversation about the needs and then compiling that back in some of your data metrics to understand and looking at the timeline to then compare notes.
Yeah. And so I imagine the length and maybe intensity is not the right word, but depending on what type of new system development you're doing here, maybe those interviews and like stakeholder like needs documentation process is maybe more lengthy. You have to talk to more people to understand more needs depending on like the number of applications you're installing, or is that true to say?
Absolutely. You got to factor that into when you're building that project plan and that project timeline. If you think it's only going to be, if it's one work stream and maybe it's only a 12-month implementation, you certainly don't want to be spending a month of that 12 months just doing interviews on building the skill set. You want to be able to take just, 1 or 2 days and get that done.
Yeah. So I got another question for you here, and this one's a bit of a curveball. But they say that if your implementation success largely hinges on business user sponsorship, that's understanding their needs, showing them that this new system is going to do that and how to do it. Do you ever run into situations where maybe there's too many cooks in the kitchen? And if you do, how do you navigate that?
I have run into that situation, and typically, I personally try to navigate it in who makes the most sense to be in those meetings, and try to cut down on the meeting attendees that are in those meetings, and then send out notes after those meetings to ensure that everyone's on the same page with what was discussed and what the plan of action was. Certainly talking about artificial intelligence, it's a great tool to kind of summarize those notes and get that back out there. So that everyone's on the same page, you get that buy-in from all the stakeholders, and you're also freeing them up in a lot of ways to do other projects and look at other meetings and other tasks that they have on their plate.
So it sounds like people are normally happy to not, like, we've decided that, based on the scope of this meeting and this team and this project, like, maybe we don't need these other individuals present, and they're usually receptive to that.
Sometimes, but I think a lot of times if you can show that this individual their feedback is warranted and their opinions are very valid and their involvement is much needed. However, if we can go ahead and continue to send out notes and keep that open dialogue after those weekly meetings or monthly meetings, that cadence, it allows them to build that trust. But also early on, it's also about building that trust to establish that you're in this together and you're here to achieve the ultimate success, which is getting the project live or post live. And you want to make sure that you have that buy-in early on so that it sets you up for success later on.
Nice, man. That was very diplomatic of you, and you're really showcasing your project management skills here, man. That sounds like some tough stuff you're doing there, and having those conversations, I imagine, isn't always easy. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we are getting close to time, and before we wrap up, I always this is becoming my trademark on the RPI Tech Connect. I like to ask my guest one question, and it's this: if you could offer today's audience one piece of advice about balancing operations and system development, what would it be?
I would say don't be afraid to just jump right into the project and ensure you have a great team around you, and you'll set yourself up for success. You really want to capitalize on making sure that you surround yourself with a great team who is both complex and diverse in their technical abilities and their operational abilities, and you'll set yourself up for success. And before you know it, you'll be live with the project.
I like that advice. I appreciate it. I think it speaks to this having the right attitude about new things, right? Sometimes there's some hesitancy and reluctance about new and different things, and about change. So this sounds like it kind of speaks to that. Is that right?
Absolutely. Change is hard, and change is inevitable, though, as we all go through life. But each project takes on its own meaning, and having that change built into the project itself really sets you up for success, and understanding the complexity and the challenge that lies ahead.
And it sounds like then that having this open mind and diving into the project is going to help in maybe being more efficient with development. And then on the flip side of that, it allows for operations to kind of continue without any roadblocks. Is that right?
Absolutely. It allows you to set yourself up for success and allows you to understand what is coming and prepare yourself mentally that this is going to be a big endeavor and this is going to be a big project and it's going to take a significant amount of time.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Spencer. It's been a joy hanging out today. For those of you tuning in, we appreciate you stopping by. If you have a question about juggling system development and day-to-day operations or project management or anything else related to today's episode, please email us at podcast@rpic.com. Again, that's podcast@rpic.com. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much.